Hey, Power People. Welcome to Renewable Rides, powered by VECKTA. I'm Gareth Evans, the CEO and founder.
And I'm Dan Roberts, head of sales. In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, learnings, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition, on-site energy, and sustainability through the experiences of our inspiring guests and team here at VECKTA.
So get ready for an exhilarating adventure into the fast-paced world of challenging limits, adapting purposefully, and empowering co-creation to accelerate the energy transition with those that are on a mission to create a more resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future. So let's go. Welcome back to Renewable Rides, and today, super excited to have Uma joining us. Uma is an energy transition expert, board member, and also runs her own company, Leading Lotus, which supports businesses to transform the way they operate, the way they perform, and the way they lead by example. Super excited to have you, Uma, and Dan and I are going to really enjoy this session with you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
That's great.
And I love the two of you guys. You're super powerful, the twin force, I call them.
So we always start our podcast with, what are you passionate about? Work and pleasure. So please.
Oh, work and pleasure. Oh, that's difficult to pry apart. So work is easy to say. I am in it. I'm involved in it. I'm on your board. So it has to be everything to do with transforming the world as is in terms of power, energy, fuel sources to a more reliable, scalable, and friendlier source in terms of the environment. So that's why I'm in everything transition, not only energy.
Yep.
So very scientifically transitional areas. So if you think about nuclear, think about what you're doing in terms of energy transition, renewables. I'm steeped in those things. In terms of personal passion, it's what I did this weekend. I cooked for people, and I made them roll their own spring rolls. I shredded tons of different kinds of veggies. I had shrimp, barbecued pork, and chicken, and they just made them roll their own spring roll, and I made the sauces, and we just had a great Vietnamese spring roll party. So I love cooking. That's one of my passions.
That sounds amazing. And does that come from your background and your origin? Was that something that you did at home growing up?
So funny story. I'm Singaporean, which is a food paradise. So Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, they're just like next door to each other. My parents never allowed me into the kitchen. It is only when so I didn't cook until I moved to the US about 13 years ago. So just to do a math, I'm 48. So I only started cooking like 35 or something. And that is out of sheer desperation for good food. I was just so depressed because the food in Singapore and the Far East is so beautiful, so awesome. And you know this, you've traveled a lot. Dan, you've traveled a lot. And then living in Colorado. So you had no choice. And there's Asian markets here, so thank God for that. And I cook my own stuff, which is street food mainly.
That's awesome. And so tell us a bit, like, you've had an incredible career, and I think your backstory will be super interesting to everyone. So growing up in Singapore, how was that? What was the family status like?
Well, I'm a Gen X in Singapore, which is basically we didn't have absent parents. We just had invisible parents. Right? We were all latchkey kids. It was an exciting time in Singapore because 74, my brothers were two years older than me. So it was awesome. We get to do anything we want. There was no monitoring. There's no supervision.
Yep.
We grew up with the street kids. Everybody was out, right? So 80s, 90s, it was just, Singapore's growth was phenomenal. And what happened with the government policies was very conducive for minorities or diversity and women to grow with that and get really educated, really powerful. And we were never told that we can't do anything. And I had two big brothers, and they would just say, start a business when I was young. So I think that really built me up for a lot of success where I am at. Remember, I didn't come from a rich family. We were dirt poor when we were born. But Singapore accelerated everybody out of the poverty mindset and into richness straight away, just through education. So university and everything was like easy to get.
That's amazing. Like, what do you think the rest of the world can learn from the way Singapore's gone about building out the country and the economy and supporting sort of almost equal opportunity by the sounds of it?
Absolutely. I mean, like, I volunteered in elementary school, you know this, here in Colorado in Cherry Creek District, just because I had time on my hands. And I thought, why not go help them out? Because they were like 30% short of teachers and paras, and about 70% down on substitute teachers. And, so one of my friends was in the HR of the school district and said, you have a business degree, we can throw a teacher's license at you. And I've never thought in my life. And you're so free, why don't you come and do 1-2 hours here and there? And so I went in and I realized how underfunded the school systems are. And that really scared the bejesus out of me, because I came from a poor nation back in the days, but we were rich in the school education system. Our teachers' minimum pay was like, you got to fight with the private sector. So it was at par with the private sector. So if you're an Accenture consultant, the teachers are getting paid the same way.
Really?
In Singapore. Yeah. And here they were so underpaid that I was like, how do they even live? Most of them are doing the work. Most teachers are there for years, have been doing the work because they're passionate about teaching, but they can't survive on that. And there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of, oh my God, I had a few teachers pass away in the last 1 year in the schools that I was volunteering. And it was just devastating. So what you can learn from Singapore is education was the number one thing to promote a highly productive nation. If you need to sum that up.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm gathering from that is that it's an investment today with a longer term view. And I'm curious, knowing your background, how that learning has translated into your professional career of kind of this longer term outlook.
Absolutely. And it's funny, Dan, like you said, I had a podcast with Christina, another company, Uncovering the Human. We were talking about the education system and the workforce that's showing up later on in the system of the society, in the economy. So our problem in Singapore is we are too book smart, right? So are we creative enough? Do we rattle and shake the cage? And it's pretty rare for a person, it's pretty rare for something like what I did, was leave the country very young, go offshore and work in an oil rig, all over the world, which is where I started, is offshore oil and gas, right? Schlumberger. That was very rare. I left the country very young and then moved around the world. That doesn't happen with a lot of people. Singaporeans are very contented and happy. They work too hard and there's not much play. But it's also a really fun society. So, we got to figure out the creativity part in Singapore, which the problem with Singapore right now is the population is dying out. We only 2.4 million people. Nobody's making babies, about 16,000 babies, the true Singaporean. So we are importing foreigners. So foreigners, about 2.4 million, Singaporeans, 2.8 million on the island. Wow. So almost half. Yeah, so it's crazy. So we've gone to a place where there's no work-life balance and family harmony. It's just like work. We became too efficient. And in US society, I think that there needs to be a balance as well. I still see a lot of work involved, a lot of burnout involved. But the education system leaves out a few key things. Social studies, I guess in US, social studies is basically geography. Or how to vote, I don't know what it was. But there's no civil education, like how do you be polite and kind and all of that stuff, right? Courtesy, all that kind of campaigns. And so how do you integrate society and all this polarizing view thoughts? How do you debate nicely, wisely, and all kind of stuff? I think those things are key in the school system.
And so you've broken a lot of glass ceilings from what I can tell in your career. Like, how did you go from growing up in Singapore, almost quite insular, out of whack work-life integration, and ended up taking the risk to leave home, and not only leave home, but join a very male-dominated industry at the time, especially offshore oil and gas, let alone just oil and gas. So how did you end up joining Schlumberger, and tell us about those experiences?
Well, yeah, it was sheer accident. I was between high school and junior college, which is pretty much high school in US. We just break it up, the British system, right? Secondary school and junior college. And we normally have like 3 months of break. One of my best friends, auntie, worked for Schlumberger, and she needed kids to come in and do filing. Now, child labor in the rest of the world back in the days was okay, right? So I was like, sure. And she paid like $50 a day. So I went in and, my friend didn't want to do it. So I went in and helped her auntie out and did filing for Schlumberger. It was their wireline technology, basically deep sea drilling and the technology that looks for reserves. And I learned a lot in just 3 months. And they left me enough to keep inviting me back for every school holidays. And then in university, I was given an internship where I was studying full time, and I was working for them at about 5 p.m. onwards. So I was like really going gung ho. I was really cracking up. At some point, I was starting to fail my courses, and so I had to switch gears and get that out of the game. And then when I finished, when I was the last year of my uni, I was doing business administration, and they requested me to major in, I was doing finance. So they requested a double major in operational and supply chain management, which was in the 90s, was very new. Yeah. And the reason was Schlumberger wanted to set up, they already had a huge base in Indonesia for supply chain management. And they move about, $5 billion worth of equipment, explosives, chemicals all around the world for their oil rigs. So they wanted me as an operations manager there. As soon as I graduated, I took 1 month road tripping in Thailand, and then I was shipped off to Indonesia to live for the next 6 years. Wow. It was crazy. Yeah, I just went with the flow. I think the difference is I didn't question anything when an opportunity came. I didn't know if it was good or bad or whatever. I just didn't say no. I just went. And then after 6 years in Indonesia, I got posted back to Singapore. Was the crisis. Another 7 years with Schlumberger, and another 3 more years here and there, because I was moving around a lot, Gareth. It was like every 2 years. I didn't know where I was. I was in Middle East. I was in Norway, North Sea. I was in Sugar Land, Texas. It was like there was no rhythm or rhyme to my life. And so I quit after 16 years and decided to get into the IT bubble in the 90s for 2 years. Sold a couple of companies. And then Accenture came knocking on my door, and jumped into Accenture's game. And then Accenture, I met Newmont Mining. So how did I end up in the US? Accenture, 3 years, I was doing all mining companies and natural resources. I was doing a lot of major transformation work. So like what you're saying, they were doing major restructuring back in this was 2007 subprime crisis. And lo and behold, when you have your recession hits really hard in 2008, gold went up. And Newmont was desperate to have consultants to support them. And so Accenture sent me flying from Singapore all the way to Elko, Nevada for 3 months. Small town. I fell in love with Elko, Nevada in 2009 and said, this is where I'm going to move. And then everything happened. About 1 year later, Newmont calls me. I know I leave after the project, and they say, we have a permanent role. It's a North America director for supply chain. Do you want to move there? I'm like, yep, sign me up.
That's amazing.
With my mom's blessing. Yeah, mom's blessing. I leave three months. I leave for US permanently, and I've never made it back to Singapore. I've been here for 13 years. Yeah.
Crazy. Singapore and Elko, quite different places.
That was crazy. Yeah. People were like, are you crazy? I mean, the people in Alco were like, what's wrong with you? It was a rugged beauty. It was really beautiful naturally.
Yeah, one thing I think that you have a really unique perspective on is, especially as we talk about the energy transition, and you being from oil and gas to mining, and now really focusing on the energy transition more broadly, is that it's all connected, and the energy transition relies heavily on the mining industry and resources. So maybe you can share a little bit of perspective on how those two are really linked, and how both of them can support each other.
Absolutely. The funniest thing is, coming from oil and gas and everything, I know there's a huge pushback from people who love the industry of petroleum and mining that, it has to happen. We can't transition to renewable so easily. It's not going to happen and all. That's a lot of, the other side of the story, right? What, can we transition away from petroleum? Well, Saudi Arabia is trying to do that. They are trying to reduce their dependency on petroleum industry. And from my perspective, right, there is a lot of technology, and this has not been new. The petroleum industries, Lumberjays, Shells, all of them knew this was coming. It's just a delaying process today, right? And there was a lot of scientific research and technology available to transition a long time ago. The question became about money, right? It takes a lot of money to transition something that's been around for 200, 300 years. But that industry also took a lot of money to begin. Yeah. So they're far ahead. So if you want to transition to renewables, and I'll come to the part where you're saying that we need minerals from mining to feed the batteries to get into renewables, correct? That's why you're saying how one has to feed the other. So we have to mine more cobalt, nickel, lithium, mineral rare earth, all of that stuff needs to go back into battery. And the more we transition into renewables, solar and all that, the more mining we need to do. Well, we are also doing a lot of recycling. People don't know that we are recycling. There's a technology for 10 years that can squish batteries and squish the minerals out of these things and recycle them back into batteries. There's an Australian company that's doing that right now. That's building another factory down in a processing plant down in Germany almost. So we should think about the circular economy. These minerals we should be able to extract out of the old panels and the old batteries and put it back in 50%. Mining is always going to be there, right? We are 8 billion society, we consume. So we need copper, we need, silver, all of that's going to go on, steel and all that. But there's a huge push to recycle metals. Metals can be recycled. You just need to extract it out. It's not hard. If I can extract metal from the ground, I can extract metal from metal. Yeah. So that's my take on it. There's going to be quite a few pushback from this, but
So when you look at the energy transition holistically, Uma, today, what is it that excites you most about the opportunity?
I think the biggest opportunity, which is why I'm so excited about VECKTA, and this is not because I like talking about VECKTA a lot, and just because I'm on your board, is the microgrids. Microgrids, everything that we have from how we are existing is ailing, right? You're talking about the way our nuclear plants, people think it's dangerous. That's because the technology is old. You look at all our oil rigs and our refineries. The refineries are pretty ailing as well. You look at mine site. I mean, I worked in mine site quite a lot, and they are ailing. And so there's going to be a trajectory where a lot of money is going to be spent on sustaining capital. Means they're going to have to figure out sustaining these things. In my mind, you don't want to spend money sustaining things anymore. Why don't you build new based on new technology, new stuff? So part of it is mining sucks a lot of energy. In fact, the top industries that suck a lot of power, the intensive power consumers, the chemical industry, your fertilizers, right? So ammonia nitrate. We use ammonia in our processing of gold for cyanide, and use it to extract gold out of the ground, which is a very tough thing to break down. So ammonia. But ammonia is also fertilizer. So, a lot of intensive energy in those plants. You're talking about your Google people, your Alphabet people, servers are sucking a lot of energy. You're talking about petroleum and coal industry, steel, iron, all that is sucking a lot of energy. So how do you, my whole passion, and I think there's such an excitement for me because I can vision building microgrids, which was already being done by mining companies. They've been doing it for 20 over years. They build power plants on remote sites to extract minerals and fuel the town that they built nearby. Never been the other way around. A power grid was not built to fuel mining. The mining companies built this power generation system. So why not just do it for a lot of industries? Get them off this 9 ailing grids in US.
Yep. Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? I actually listened to a podcast the other day, the CEO Diary, and he was interviewing Richard Brandt, and I thought it was a really interesting conversation. And he was thinking about communities more broadly and saying, everyone's lacking trust, they're lacking community feel, community touch, and all of this is because of that kind of big centralized system whereby those people that are running those systems aren't necessarily aligned with what our needs are, and we have more in common with each other, even if our political values are different. And he was talking about this more distributed, community-based future, and it had so many parallels actually to the energy transition, moving away from these kind of easier to build, harder to maintain, centralized systems that are more vulnerable, but remove kind of the whole community feel. And he was saying, what if your local municipal water system and energy system was run by the community? They'd take care of it because you're completely dependent on it, versus it being this mythical thing that's done thousands of miles away and the power just shows up. Like, you've got no connection with it at all. So I thought it was super interesting. I think it speaks to what you're describing is how can we make it more localized, more sustainable, more circular, more community driven. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, I like what you guys do, and I would love to hear your feedback on that. And I just love what you just said about Richard Branson. I think regionalizing or doing satellite grids, through an industry, through a profit-centered company, and then that's feeding. That's how they do it in oil and gas. Like the whole of Brunei was built by Shell. Yeah. The royal family just enjoyed the rest of it, but it's built by Shell. Basically, they were drilling oil there for 50 years, a decade. I don't know how. Not even a decade. It's like 100 years almost. But they built the hospitals, the power station, pretty much the schools and everything. So I love that what you just said. Lots to think about. It's common service, right? It's basic service is power. If you can't power your people, that's a lost cause.
Well, and interestingly, coming full circle in the conversation, power is one of the key things when you look at education.
Yeah.
And bringing education to people. So I think it's a really important piece, and we're seeing the decentralization happen in a variety of places. I think people are more and more, as we're seeing cold snaps and or big freezes in Texas, and storms in the Northeast, and the wildfires out here in California. The importance of not relying on a centralized system, because producing it where it's needed is ultimately leads to more resilience. So
absolutely, yeah.
Something that you've already experienced quite a bit in the mining sector, where the mining companies didn't wait for the power companies, the utilities, to bring power to them. They just made it their own and were self-reliant. So I think there's a lot to be learned there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like companies like Newman that I work for, they built, oh my God, it's beautiful. A huge power station that Nevada Energy was buying energy for the whole entire Elko, Nevada. And then they had a PPP agreement and stuff like that. And it was on TS Ranch, which is Newmont's land, and it's run by Newmont. It was beautiful plan. And recently, I think Newmont doesn't own it anymore. Barrick bought over 68% of that whole Nevada site. So recently, they are looking at bringing in natural renewable resources, solar and everything, to feed the power, natural gas. So trying to convert it into a renewable power plant. So imagine that. That's exciting. So mining companies do have the capability and the money. Big oil and gas companies have that. I don't know where you see, you're in this business, so you got to tell me, where do you see is the roadblock, the mindset roadblock, or is it like financial roadblock, or what is it, political roadblock?
We were going to ask you the same based on your industry experiences cutting across all. I think from my perspective, Uma, I think it's just there's definitely that status quo mentality, and I think it's been easy to just accept that this is the way it's always been done, and let's not disrupt the way we do business today, and let's just keep doing what we're doing because we have a gravy train commercial model that's working for us, and getting people to change their mindsets and see that this is being sustainable is not at the expense of being profitable. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions in the industry today. And instead of people seeing it as the most profitable thing to be doing, not only financially, but for their business, for their community, for their employees, for their customers, for them being able to source future contracts. So I think it's that, I think actually coming back to the conversation we were having earlier about education, it's kind of investing today, knowing that you're going to get a real long-term return on investment versus this kind of short knee-jerk reaction of let's solve a problem, let's put a band-aid on it, and someone else will figure it out 3 or 5 years from now when I'm not in the role. I think there's a lot of that kind of short-term mentality of people just kicking the can down the road and hoping that their successor takes care of it for them. Does that resonate with you? What have you seen?
Oh yeah, no. That's my frustration even coming from the petroleum industry as well. Most of the companies I worked for are really good at that mindset of let's improve and transition and transform. So they're not the roadblock, but the people outside that industry that lobby for the industry seem to be the roadblock, not so much the industry leaders of the petroleum industries. It's the political system that seems to break down in between the regulation and the politics and something. But if you take the Singapore model, right? Singapore's model it's a 100-year model. They do stuff today for 100 years down the road. In fact, they built the casino, the Singapore's 2 casinos, the famous ones, the one with the boat on top.
Yeah.
That was 50 year in the making. Casinos, like gambling was not allowed. It was a vice. It was not allowed in Singapore. So for them to even come to that level, they had to plan it 50 years ahead to make sure that they introduced the vice into the society in a nice form of way. And so it was in the plan. If you go into their ERA development, the economic renewal development, they had this entire model of the island. And you can see all these little buildings popping up and going different places, 50 years in the making. And the education system is the same. The way Singapore is powered through and is an incinerator. We don't have coal power. We incinerate all our garbage. We have a scrubber, so there's no carbon that's released out, or it's very minimal. And it powers the entire city. And that was 50 years old. So it's easy to do it in a small society. When it comes to a big society like US, it's so complicated.
Sounds like one of the challenges is just to get people to have a bit of a more longer term view and take control of it for themselves, or realize that what may seem challenging of changing the way that they consume power, that it's actually more accessible than maybe they anticipated. But if they have a longer term view rather than just the next quarter or the next year or the next 2 years, that can get people over the line on making the transition.
And I think also making
absolutely.
it fun, making it interesting, educating. There's so much misinformation out there, isn't there? I think most people don't even know what energy is. They don't know the terms associated with it. So I think what we're seeing is the more we can educate business leaders, give them the necessary data and tools to make these informed decisions, such that it doesn't feel complex and confusing and overwhelming, I think. Yeah, absolutely spot on.
Yeah. That's another interesting topic that I was discussing with Christina, the other podcast, and cover the human. Theirs is more on the workforce side, right? How do you get people in the workforce to be more happy and productive at the same time, engaged? Like you have a great model, Gareth, you and Dan, and the whole team is so together in sync. I mean, it's not easy to start a company like this and in a topic that's so difficult to transition with all the mindset blocks. So it has to do with a lot of human connection building within the company, as well as with your clients, your partners, and your board directors. But when we were talking about how do we get what is breaking down in the education system today that is showing up in the workforce. And so we were talking to one of the millennial podcaster, Alex, and he was correct. He was saying that in the school education system, it was all about GPA points and scores, and it was about I'm gonna beat you with points. I'm gonna have to. It's the rat race within the education system. And then when you come out to work, they're telling you to collaborate, to team up, to use empathy, to use compassion, diversity. It's like complicated as that. So what you do in your school system is the exposure needs to be open to the new science, right? The new science is take a field trip to the nuclear plant nearby, or take a field trip to an energy grid nearby. Go figure out what's happening with the environment. Spend time with a physicist and astrophysicist. It's so much out there. I'm still in love. We're talking about the new innovation. I'm still in love with Tesla, not Elon Musk Tesla. Tesla, the real guy, Nikola. The tower that he built in Texas. You know that tower So he built a tower in 1917, and it still exists in Texas, to generate power. And he was 100% sure, and the scientists are still on it, right, that you can transfer energy power from that tower to any receiver, any part of the world, and power up a light bulb or anything. It's everywhere. And the tower exists till today. It was shut down. And there's all this theory about why it was shut down. Because if you have free power, you can't control society. So anyway, so all these power theories are going on. And the tower is still there. And I think that a couple of companies are trying to revive that technology, right? Power should not have to be a commodity at all. It's supposed to be something that's just there. And if you go to Africa, it's funny, the certain parts of Africa, they're taking it into their own hands instead of going to the typical pedagogy of, the British colonized education system. They're educating themselves in science and figuring out ways to power their own community, own villages where they're kind of remote and stuff like that. So I think back to two things we're going in circles is, community needs to be able to power themselves and support themselves, sustain themselves. Education is key.
Yeah.
And circular economy. Everything that we use needs to go back and be used again.
Yeah, super awesome conversation. I think we could go on for hours. We've got a few more questions to close out, but one question I'd like to ask before we do, Uma, when you were talking about your journey at the beginning, I felt like there was a few things that stood out. One, just say yes, don't overthink things, kind of embrace the adventure, go on the journey. And almost secondly, the Elko, it almost sounded like you kind of manifested where you'd end up, or Have you got any cool stories for us to share or inspire people who are either starting their career or halfway through it and thinking about how do I get into the energy transition? What's a cool story that you can share about either of those kind of?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Actually, you're right. I mean, everything that's happened to my life from Schlumberger, getting into Schlumberger to getting out and getting into Accenture. Now, Accenture was a manifestation like crazy. So I think maybe I'll share with you Accenture, how I got into it. When I was tired of moving around the world, offshore oil rigs and all of that, I decided I'm gonna take my Singapore headquarters and smoosh it with Dubai headquarters, take the guy who's working for me and make him the leader for Middle East, Asia Pacific supply chain organization, right? Huge thing. So I restructured and got rid of my job and took my retrenchment money because it was like 16 months, right? So 16 months plus another 3 months. So it's 19 months of salary right there. So you have to be clever about these things, right? So there's part brains, part gut, part whatever universal energy that's pushing you into a certain environment. So did that all great. So I decided to take that money. And since I've been working like crazy for 16 years with no break, I decided to go camp out in Bali. Before I left Schlumberger, I always knew that I was in the trajectory to be my own boss. What, how, what industry? Didn't think about it. Just said, I have to start my company at some point, right? But I need a consulting background. I was an internal consultant to Schlumberger, which is awesome. They never hired external consultants. But I need to understand how this whole consulting, McKinsey, Bain, Accenture, I had no exposure to them. I just knew them by name, works. And so I went out to Bali, obviously. What's the first thing you do? You go out to Bali and you like meditate for like 3 months. My hope was to stay out there for 6 months. I mean, I had a lot of money, so I could live like a king out there. Within a month of just relaxing by the pool and drinking beer, and I'm thinking, this life sucks. There's no aim, there's no goal. I was more depressed in Bali than I've ever been. Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, it's like being in, it's like a jewel in the, like a part of like a Hawaii kind of that environment, right? It's beautiful oceans and all that. But I was lost. I get a call from one of my best friends who left Schlumberger and became the senior director for Accenture in Malaysia. How cool is that? So he's calling me and he said, hey, I just created your CV and gave it to the Singapore Accenture people. They're looking for someone to create the natural resources consulting arm. So I think it'd be great for that. I'm like, what? I said, I'm barely out here for 1 month now. My typical mental block, right? No, why, how, what, when? I want to be here for another 6 months. But it's what I asked for. I need to be in a consulting environment to learn consulting. How do I know this consulting piece? How do I, price myself? So long story short, I'm leaving Bali within another 2 weeks, getting interviewed and then landing a very high profile role with them, which sets me on for another 3 years with them. And I'm thinking, this is a great MBA, but it's not for me. I learn all the ropes about consulting and management consulting, which sets me up for more success. I work with CEO level people from big companies, semiconductor companies, mining companies. The exposure is awesome, right? How do you deal with them? How do you deal with them and help them out in their transformation? So clients are like, Caltex, BHP, Rio Tinto, you name it, all the Deutsche Bank during the subprime crisis. We were like, oh my God. So fascinating. And then I land Newma. And then they ship me to Elko. And I'm like, aha. I've already been feeling like I need to leave Singapore for some odd reason because I've been there for 7 years almost. And then they offer me the job and I'm like, this is it. Let's go. That's it. So you manifest and the calling comes to you. There is a calling. You just need to align with it. And it's a lot of resonance aligned, just like the two of you, I mean, your story is equally powerful, how you came about VECKTA, right? It's a calling. It summons you, whether you can kick all you want, but it's going to summon you to do your calling.
And you just have to embrace it when the signs show up. I think that's something that I've mostly realized as you travel a lot around the world and being in your career. A lot of people say that they want to travel with work and do these things. And when it actually comes to packing the bags and leaving their friends and their family and starting again and having to get driving licenses and find places to live and all these things that people don't think about, the percentage of people who actually do it is pretty small. But then once you're in that network of people that do it, it becomes this kind of fraternity for life.
Yeah, absolutely. The doorways just keep opening up and you just go through the doorway.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, well, let's we've taken up a great amount of your time. This has been awesome, but let's finish with a few. Have you got any favorite quotes, Uma, that you'd love to share with everyone?
There's a lot of favorite quotes. None of it I can say it on air. But I think I'll just say this, since we're talking about resonance and callings and all that. Your mind controls what you think and do. It's your gut, it's your heart that tells you what you should be doing. So figure out a way to balance that and not be too risk averse, but at the same time, don't be just risk crazy either. But go for it.
That's great. And if you could be any energy transition technology, what would you be and why?
Ooh. Well, I told you I like the Nikola thingy, so I might have to be a physicist. Well, I really love nuclear as well, so nuclear scientist as well.
Do you think nuclear is a big part of the future?
We just had a TEDx, and I'm on the, like you guys know, I'm on the board of TEDx. We just had a great speaker about nuclear, how it's actually a lot safer, and the technology is so much cleaner than people realize, and we have enough nuclear with the recyclable nuclear. We're not talking about finding new, plutonium and all that. Nothing like that. It's the stuff that we already have. We can recycle that and power the entire world for 100 years. That was the speaking. We have it. We just have to figure out to say, stop, let's go this way. As a whole human being group, right? As a humanity, we need to shift. That's the problem right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Back to educate.
Yeah. Well, I would want to leave you guys with the last question. If you want to impart anything to, well, you have two boys. Is that two kids? Two boys, and Gareth has one boy. What would you tell your kids today? Now we're talking about what happened with my growth. What would you do? What would you tell them today that was going to help them?
Yeah, mine is to explore all things and not go like expose. One of my goals as a parent is to expose them to as many different things as I possibly can, so that they can find their passion and pursue their passion. I think that's one of the most important things, because too often I think people go into a particular profession or down a certain path in life because of what they're told to do or what they expect society expects of them, rather than following what they're truly passionate about. And so I personally have gone on that journey of kind of veering away from the things that I was most interested in, and then intentionally putting on the blinders and coming back to the energy space, and was fortunate to find Gareth, and now we're building here. So I think that's my biggest thing.
Nice.
Yeah,
I like that.
Quite similar, I'd say. First of all, be nice. Being nice gets you a huge way, and I think that's massively overlooked these days. So be nice, say yes, embrace the adventure, and challenge authority, the status quo, and think for yourself and get after it. And try and find, like what Dan said, find what you're passionate about, because then life becomes fun and easy. And so, yeah, it's exciting seeing these youngsters grow up in different world.
Absolutely. My God, the world has changed so much.
And so, Uma, if you could have us interview anyone else on this podcast, who would you have us bring on, and what would you like to ask them? Could be anyone. Yeah.
Could be anyone. Oh, wow. That's a difficult question. I guess I would get you to interview Richard Branson.
Okay.
Right?
What would you ask him?
How much money do you have? Can I have it? No, I mean, I think that the thing I would ask him is similar to what you guys asked me, is what needs to happen to break the status quo? How would you break the status quo? And he's in an environment where he's obviously broken a lot of status quo. In this area, how would you break that?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, he's an inspiring dude, isn't he? He takes on the Goliaths and does it, or did it, especially in the early days, on a totally different
I call him the nicer version of Elon Musk. So, I have to say, I admire Elon Musk, but at the same time, I just can't deal with the other side of him.
Love it. Dan, any other questions from you?
No, I think this has been awesome. Uma, your journey is inspiring, and really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience, and hopefully inspire others to say yes and embrace the challenges and opportunities of life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing chatting with the two of you.
Absolute pleasure. Appreciate your time, Uma, and we'll definitely get you back, because I think there's hundreds of other topics and rabbit warrens we could go down. So really enjoyed it. Appreciate you. Happy July 4th, everyone.
Happy 4th of July.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.